This conference is brought to you by CodeStack, React and React Native development experts.
Hey everyone, I'm super excited to be back at React Native EU. And today I'm going to talk about building accessibility hooks for React Native and web. I'm Sanket. I'm a software engineer at Geeky Ants. And I go by the Twitter handle Sanket Sahu. You might have come across this tweet which went viral. And so that's me. And so I'm tuning in from the beautiful city of Bangalore. I wish I was there, and I wish it was an in-person conference. But yeah, here we are. This nice illustration by Abibak. So thank you so much for that. So let's get back to the topic and try to decode that building accessibility hooks for React Native and web. First of all, what is accessibility? So I went through the MDN docs and found this, which broadly defines what accessibility means. So it is the practice of making your websites usable by as many people as possible. I think the same applies to apps too. So it would be websites and apps, making them usable by more and more people. That's a very broad definition. So if we narrow it down into like what are the characteristics or what are the support that you need to make your website and apps accessible, it would be something like it should be compatible with screen readers, so that people with visual impairment or low vision can use the screen readers and understand what the app is all about or what the website says. And the same thing applies with contrast ratio with people with low vision. And then we have responsive design, like the app or the website needs to be accessible on mobiles, like smallest mobile out there, and to the like desktop, and maybe to the largest display out there, 108 inches TV or something. And keyboard accessible. I think this, I really am fond of using keyboards a lot, and I use like tabs and arrow keys a lot, and websites that don't work with keyboards, it's like really hard. So let's see what are these things and how we can enable these things in our websites and apps. How to build accessible websites, and I'm going to talk specifically in terms of React. So straight to the documentation. Documentation says that web accessibility, also referred as A11Y, it can be enabled. We can work on this, and React fully supports building accessible websites, often by using standard HTML techniques. So what are these standard HTML techniques? So W3C and WCAG, these are like guidelines. WCAG is a guideline that is provided, and we can like go through all the things that we can do. So it's usually with attributes that you can add to HTML markup, and that makes the particular page or app accessible. Let's see an example. For example, if there is an input box and I would like that to make it ARIA compatible and make it required for people who are using it with just say screen readers. So I can pass in a prop called ARIA-required as true. And this is an HTML standard attribute that is also supported in React. If we pass that when we are using a page with or this input box with a screen reader, it says that this is a required field. And we can also add a label, something like ARIA-label, and drop in some label, and it reads that loud. So React and HTML standards for ARIA, it's more or less the same thing, but React provides reactivity on top of it, which makes more sense. So let's see that in detail. So how do we create a component? So a component can be created by these 5 steps that I always come back to: writing the markup, doing the styling. and adding interactions like handling events, and then handling the states, and last but not the least, accessibility. Let's take an example of creating a checkbox component for the web. So say I want a checkbox, so I'll wrap it in a label markup and then have input type checkbox and some text around it. As step 2, I would add some styling just with class names here, no CSS and JS. And yeah, so next we can add interaction. For example, on the right side you can see like as we click on the checkbox, it shows an alert message. So pretty standard stuff, input on change alert, and then it does the trick. Next, let's make it talk to the state and let the state update the DOM. How do we do it? So create state and then on change set that state and pass in the same value in the checked value of the input box, checked prop of the input box. So as we do it, we click on that and then state is updated and the screen, the component re-renders. Last, accessibility. So we have props like aria-checked, aria-labeled by that we are going to use here in this input box is the same value that we pass to checked prop in input. We can use the same thing and pass it to aria-checked. So with screen readers or with when we like use keyboard, so this says that the current value of checkbox is checked and the label also reads out. We can have aria labeled by as I agree. So one thing to notice here is that is the React's component state that is building the initial UI, and it's not just the visual UI that it is building, it is also building the accessibility tree structure and accessible, like something that is not that can't be seen by the users just by the screen readers. It also builds that, and whenever that is being updated, it's updating the state, and that reactively updates the ARIA values as well. So React is working for both the things, for the visual aspect of things and the non-visual aspect of the things, which is super interesting. And here we are using standard input of type checkbox. So we don't have to do much, but we can also make use of, say, something like div and make it behave like a checkbox by adding something like role is equal to, say, checkbox. And then we have our checked in there and labeled by. So visually we can style a div like a checkbox, but to make the browser understand and the users of the browser understand that that particular div is a checkbox, we can use role property. Great, let's move on. So let's see accessibility for mobiles, for iOS and Android. And to do that, we'll use React Native. So straight to the documentation, React Native also provides a unified API for iOS and Android to make the apps accessible. For example, we can say that a view, which is equivalent to, which is somewhat like to div, accessible is equal to true. So as we do that, screen readers start identifying this piece of this block of code as accessible unit, and it starts to read out like text 1 and text 2 at the same time. In this example, both the text nodes are not accessible directly, but the view wrapper view is accessible, and the screen reader reads, concats everything inside that, like text 1, text 2, and it reads that out. It also has focus management and things like that, which just maps by using this accessible is equal to true. Anyway, we have more props that can be used. So we have things like accessibility role and accessibility label, and yeah, accessibility role and state and value. These three are like very important. That makes the end users understand what type of element they are focusing on, and then what's the current state and what's the current value, all these things. Apart from these three, there are like really important ones, and the black ones are supported on iOS, whereas the green ones are for Android. So let's create a checkbox component for mobile devices. So standard React Native will use the pressable component. We'll create a nested view inside that and add some text. Then add an icon and style it with standard React Native style sheet.create, and then handle the state, on press handle toggle, update the state, and also update the UI based on that state, checked with checkbox marked and checkbox blank outline. And then we need to wire the same state with the accessibility role. So here we are using accessibility role as checkbox and accessibility state as checked. Now this makes it work for screen readers, for the visual aspect of things, and it just works. So this is a very basic example of like how accessibility can be enabled on top of the existing UI.
Talk back on. Not checked checkbox, I agree. Checked. Tap to.
So this is a quick example of like how screen readers work when we have accessibility enabled. How can we do the same thing for web, or can we write a unified say markup or unified component that works on both the platforms? Yes, it's pretty much possible. We can use React Native Web to map the same React Native API on the web, and let's see how that can be done. So let's assume that this is our dream API and this is what we want to do. Like create a checkbox component that works on all the platforms. It takes an isCheck prop, and it has onChange handlers that updates the check value, and then it has text inside it that says I agree. So to build this and to make it look the same on web, iOS, Android, on Android, without losing the capabilities of the native accessibility on all these platforms, how can we do it? Let's see. So we can abstract out the UI part and create a component, say custom checkbox UI. That's a dumb component, takes in checked, and then gives us the checked UI of that. We can pass in false for the check value and just empties out the checkbox. Great. And so to make it accessible, we have to write some conditional code. React Native Web handles it well, but there are cases where we'll have to write something specific for web. The first default thing that comes to our mind is handling the keyboard versus handling the touch events. So here's a quick example of like how we can make the same checkbox UI like accessible on different platforms. So we can write some conditionals with platform.os as web, and then write, if it is web, then use the native input and write the onChange and type as checkbox. So this does most of the trick, like if we have input as checkbox. But on the parent, if we see, we have accessibility role as label, and this makes it tappable on the web, or maybe, sorry, clickable on the web. And here we are using the same custom checkbox UI. And if we have a look at the input onChange, that component is wrapped in a visually hidden view. So it hides the real input box and shows the custom checkbox UI while maintaining the accessibility aspect of things, because the wrapper view at the top level has accessibility role as label. Great. And for mobile phones, we go ahead and add accessibility role as checkbox, accessibility state as checked. So on the web, where exactly are we handling accessibility role as checkbox? So we are using a native input type is equal to checkbox. So that does the trick. We don't have to specifically notify that we are using a checkbox. And then, yeah, update the state accordingly. So this piece of code works on all the platforms. Like for native, React Native does the trick. On web, we are using a native input box. Input type is equal to checkbox, and then this works. So this is a very simple and a high level example of like adding accessibility that works everywhere. There are more things to consider. The first one is definitely keyboard interaction. An example of this would be when we are building, say, combo box or select boxes. We focus that using tabs, and then when we press spacebar, it opens up, and we can use the arrow keys up and down, and then press enter to select that value. Then it closes the pop-up. That's one example, and this is like one of the hardest example when it comes to adding accessibility to a custom combo box. It also goes as a joke in the community, in the design systems community. Anyway, and then screen readers, we have to make it compatible with the labels and all those things. And contrast ratio, even the visual aspect of things, those with low vision, can they read the text? Do we have like enough contrast ratio in the foreground and the background color? We have more than this. These are like just few points. And that's where the A11Y project comes in. It's a very nice project. They have detailed down like all the different aspects of accessibility. They also provide a checklist that any developer or a team can go ahead and check if they are compliant with all those things. And yeah, they have the compliance in like 3 different levels: A, AA, and AAA. A is essential sort of accessibility that all the apps and websites must adhere to. This can be something like adding alt text, adding captions, adding placeholder and whatnot, like these basic things that is like essential for any app or any website per se. Then we have AA. AA is a little stricter than A. It has all the checklist of A, but it has a few more things. For example, it has the contrast ratio of text versus background must be at least 4.5 to 1. So yeah, that's one thing. Then we also have subtitles for the videos and few other things, and this is like required by multiple government and public body websites. Then we have AAA. AAA is like very strong level of compliance. This is like, for example, it has a contrast ratio of 7 to 1. And then we have, if there is any video on the website, that has to have a sign language support for people who can't hear. So yeah, these 3 levels are really important to understand, and also to cross check with the website, like if your app or website falls under like which category. Anyway, they also have a checklist, the A11Y project. For example, for keyboard, they have like these 3 things. Make sure there is a visible focus style for interactive elements that are navigated to via keyboard. Then we have like when you press tab, does it like maintain the same order as per the visual layout, or does it like jump from the first one to the 4th one and then goes back to the 2nd one? And then a lot of things like this, it's in their checklist, and they have a very nice like write-up around it. Same thing for mobile and touch. Do we have like horizontal scrolling? If we rotate the screen, does everything like reorganize well? So go ahead and check out the A11Y project. And yeah, so this brings me to React Aria. This is a brilliant project by the Adobe team. React Aria provides a set of React hooks that anybody can use to build like accessible UI primitives for their design system or for just their component library. Huge shout out to Devon, who is heading this project at Adobe. And they also have another project in the same set of projects. The parent group of projects is called as React Spectrum, which has React Aria and React Stately. React Stately is the state management piece of building these like UI primitives. For example, we have use toggle state as a hook. Let's see that. Let's see one of the examples. So to build the same checkbox, if we are using React Aria, so we can use toggle state from stately, React stately, and we can use checkbox from React Aria. And then we can have a label and input and spread that input props that comes from use checkbox right into the input element. And yeah, this does all the trick of like making that particular component accessible with like keyboard, with mouse on top of it, and for screen readers and everything. Also, these hooks are like service layers, and it's more like they don't provide any UI. So the keyboard handling or mouse handling and the accessibility part of it, all these things are like abstracted out, which can be dropped into other UI components to make them accessible. And that's the beauty of React Aria. Yeah, so this is an example, and we can go ahead and use like checkbox, and this just works. It also gets all those props like is, indeterminate, and all the things that a checkbox has. Great. So then there's another project. This is called React Native Aria. This extends the support of React Aria to mobile phones. So, and this project, a huge shout out to Nishan. He has worked a lot on this project. He's like a sole developer, but there were like people in the team who helped him out. Yeah, so let's see React Native Aria and how Nishan and team, they have built this React Native Aria. So React Native Aria is a set of React hooks to build accessible UI primitives for React Native and web. So very similar thing, but it works for React Native, but with the help of React Native Web, it works on like all the platforms. So here's another example. So we can import use checkbox from React Native Aria, and then use toggle state from React stately, and then spread this input props, which has like on change, on press, and accessibility state. So depending on the platform, it returns if we need on change or on press. On press works for React Native, and on change works on the web. So let's see. So we can use like visually hidden, that's another component that hides that particular input box that comes from React Aria, and then the custom checkbox UI can be used. And we just spread that input props that's received from use checkbox and pass it on input. And the same thing also goes on the pressable component in React Native. And yeah, so it handles like most of the things for accessibility, right from say tab, like focus ring, or handling the keyboard interaction. And checkboxes, again, it's a very simple example. It gets really complicated when we have like menu or combo box or radio buttons. Here is the source code, a very high level source code that this hook provides. It takes in all the props and state and also the input ref of the checkbox, and then it returns the input props that is actually spread on the pressable component. If you see it in the last slide, pressable spreads input props. So all these things are passed back to that particular element, pressable, and it adds accessibility role and accessibility state, which is picked up by React Native's pressable component. And on the website, so React Native Aria has a file for use checkbox.web.js. So this straight away imports React Aria's checkbox, use checkbox, and then exports it. The source code of React Aria's checkbox is something very similar to this, but instead of using React Native specific roles, we use like aria-check then check. Great. So we have a lot more hooks that's available in React Native Aria. Another example is use focus ring. This adds the focus ring on components. So when using keyboard and pressing tabs, we get the focus ring of the keyboard, which is independent of where the mouse cursor is. So we can use it like use focus ring and then spread it right away on the pressable component. So next we have use hover. Use hover is similar to use focus ring, but yeah, this is straight away does the trick of spreading hover props like and all those things, which makes it like hoverable. Great. So then we have use overlay position. This places the overlay, something like a tooltip or a popover, and yeah, so we can use overlay position, and this takes in the target element and also the overlay element, the ref of them obviously, and then gives the props like top, left, bottom, right position of that of the placement, and it just really works really well. So we can use a trigger component and then click on the button, and then it just places that popover. Great. So that's use overlay use overlay position, and then we have more hooks like use combo box, use slider, use menu, use checkbox, use group, use radio, and yeah, switch, tooltips, and popover. Great. So this is a joint effort. I would say that Nishan and team, they have like worked on something on the React Native side and then mapped back to React Aria for the React system. And yeah, we have put all these things in UI component library on the next version of native base. So native base essentially is mobile first accessible components for React Native and web. This is based on the utility first principles, and React Native Aria is used here with many components of native base to make it accessible and also to make it work on all the platforms. So native base components works on iOS, Android, and web, and it also behaves natively, like with tabs, with hover, and a lot of platform level things. Yeah, so the checkbox example that we had in the earlier slides is actually available in native base, and we can go ahead and use it. And yeah, here is another example that is to create a menu component. It's really hard to make menus accessible, like pressing enter or space opens up the menu, and then using the cursor it goes. So let's see that example, how this is done. So we can press enter and then type even like R, M, and all those things to filter out or hover that particular menu. So let's see it again, enter and then down, and then we can type R and then M, and it takes us there. This is what we developers do most of the time, isn't it? And the same thing works for screen readers on different platforms. So this is an example of Android. Let's see that. I hope you can hear it.
Tapped. More options menu button. Pop-up window. Menu item Arial. Menu item Tahoma disable. Menu item Roboto. Expo Go. More options menu but
great. So yeah, those were like few of the examples from React Native Aria being used in native base, and this is the team. They have worked really hard on building React Native Aria plus native base, and yeah, it's open source. Go ahead and try to use it. All ears on the feedback. Yeah, the team is trying to build it like compatible for all the platforms. It's a hard problem to solve, to be honest. But yeah, let's see how far we go. That's all from my side. Yeah, there are a few projects that you would like to check from the same team. There's a state management library called Sync State. Then we have React Pluggable, a form library using MST, FormST, and then BuilderX. That's a design tool that codes, and yeah, API beats. Great. So that's all from me. I'm Sanket, and go ahead and let's connect on Twitter. My DMs are open. Yeah, that's all for now. Thank you so much.